In the beginning, when the mirror shifted, beaming shadow and substance, the cosmic whirl of electromagnetic decibels booming through the inverse dimensions, rocking the night fantastic, galactic burst spiraling through the galaxies on its own course, changing, shifting its invention to challenge the dialectic roads of evolution. The note was born. From that day on, jazz paid solos like the headless drummer to the Faustian cadence of the marketplace.
Yeah, Jeff, Jimmy Lyons. Yeah, I appreciate your conciliatory feeling and your instincts for what may be possible futuristically down the road. Maybe next week I can sit down a second. I'm really engaged in some serious finishing of projects, and I'm having problems. I got hit by a car and a number of things, and I'm still recovering from that. But I have a number of really difficult and interesting projects that I'm completing, and they're in progress now. As again, I like the piece of, that video of Bobby. Boy, that was great. Bobby, Jack, and I initially experienced so much the real beach, the real scene in New York. And anyway, Jeff, I am interested in the documentary in some way. I have a lot of things already recorded. I have enough there to actually make a couple of documentaries, but it's all in progress, and I'll get back to you and we'll talk about it and see where we're at. And but again, it's way down the road. It's way down the road. Okay, Jeff, take care, man, and have a good day, guys.
The recent news, the recent unfortunate news that Jimmy Lyons passed away sometime between yesterday and earlier in the week. I received a voicemail from Jimmy this past Sunday. I called him back the same day, left him a message. But anyway, I was trying to meet up with him to interview him. It's hard to talk about some of this stuff. How I relate to him, he's a man. He lives alone. As far as I know, he was single. For the most part, I'm in a similar situation. He was 86. I'm 36. You don't realize as you get older. It's a very gradual, seemingly incremental process, and then one day, things stop working, or they're not, parts of your body aren't as strong as they used to be, including your mind. How do we come to terms with that? How do I come to terms with that? So perhaps when it comes down to age, that's the lesson learned. I mean, Jimmy did a lot in his life, and he was still working on stuff. He just went for it all the way. He really was the music. He was jazz. He lived jazz.
"52nd Street jazz, blown from clubs of after-hour places, where midnight faces leave their traces in those after-hour rendezvous, bound till 1:45, Billy's Blues. Heartfelt inner voicing in the neon-stalked streets. now washed away by too many bleak dawns of bring down morning song. Quivering note sounds going blues. Good morning, heartache. Billy's blues sound like rain. Lester plays to ease the purge of drugs, crazed nights embedded in dying gardenias, her flower song of beatific sorrow, cradled by heavy sitones, lullabies of high. Shocks of rude elements silencing the unwritten score. Good morning, heartache, Billy's blues, full-throated, ancestral murmurings that curl, bend, fondle to kiss the smoky jazz night. The big-tone nights forming dark knotted stars, going blues, Billy's blues.
It took me a while to meet him. I didn't really see him around. I think Mel first told me about him a couple years ago, and I just thought it sounded interesting, but I was unfamiliar and I guess busy with, other things, other projects, and I didn't really ever look him up. We saw him somewhere, maybe on the sidewalk, and then we wound up in Books Inc., and it was in Books Inc. on the bench in front of the magazines that he just started telling me about all these interesting stories about his life and, the writing, the music, how that all began for him, and even acting, with going to the Actors Studio in New York, and Robert De Niro was in his class, and Timothy Carey and Christopher Walken. I mean, you could tell he probably doesn't talk to many people, so the effect of that was he just kept going and going and just telling me all these stories, and I just was listening and kept asking him more questions. I wish I could have interviewed him. I tried. I gave an effort. I mean, I was going to write him this letter, and send it out and explaining, the project and stuff. The letter. Dear Jimmy, this is Jeff M. Giordano. It's been wonderful to talk to you on multiple occasions about your music and writing and your experiences of life. I would love to meet up with you at your earliest convenience to interview you for a short documentary about your creative life and your personal life. Have a great day. Keep on playing the music and writing and keeping the poetry alive. Keep on keeping the poetry alive. Do you miss Jimmy?
I miss him, but like I say, he never wanted people to get too close to him.
Why do you think that is?
His brother said that. He said he was basically a loner.
All his life?
That's what. He was close to his mother. That's what his brother said.
Would you say he was a mysterious person?
Yeah, didn't he seem like a loner to you?
Yeah.
Mysterious, yeah. The only reason he told me a lot of stuff about his life is because I was a neighbor and I got to know him. So,
right.
And I helped him, and he would help people.
He was just an artist who was focusing on his art forms. For some people, I guess that's more mysterious. I don't know how much he intended or meant to be mysterious. I think he just, there was some melancholy, there was some sense of loss, and maybe just disconnect, between different chapters or parts of his life, and different people that he had been important to him that had been lost. And so he was definitely, I don't know if you'd call that mysterious as much as he just living in connection with some of the people that maybe did know him better.
Let's see, specific stories looking back between you and Jimmy, if it was when you both hung out for, the whole day or most of the night.
hung out like that with him. The most I would do with Jimmy was I'd not call him. Well, it was difficult to call him. Oh my God! Sometimes his box would be full. You couldn't leave a voicemail. You could hardly ever get through to Jimmy. So the only time I made any type of connection with Jimmy was in the club, and I would say, yeah, Jimmy, like, how about tomorrow, man? Let's get together at Starbucks over here and just sit and talk. And so I'd get together with him, and guess what? He'd show up with his paper and his pencil, and we talked for maybe an hour, and that would be the end of it.
And loneliness, perhaps, or solitude.
Well, actually, I'd go a little further. The word I would use is alienation. And Jimmy was definitely alienated, without a doubt. And I think he understood that. He understood that he was alienated, but as far as he was concerned, that was sort of like an insoluble problem. He was always going to be that way, and he accepted that that was his position in life. What it all adds up to, I can't tell you.
What caused his alienation?
I don't know. I really don't. And I don't know if he knew.
With Jimmy, I think he isolated himself to an extent, but perhaps the fact that he frequented the Oaks Card Club in Emeryville, on the Emeryville-Oakland border. This establishment has card tables for gamblers, a bar for drinkers, and a dining area for those who would like to eat and drink. Jimmy Lyons would often go to the Oaks Card Club around 10 o'clock at night and stay all night in the dining area, writing, having a coffee or a soft drink, something to eat. And this was his second home. Do you know how many years he worked at Golden Gate Fields Racetrack?
God, he had to be out there. Let's say he worked there during the 60s, probably the later 60s, maybe, I don't know, I'm thinking around 65, somewhere in there, till about 90. He probably worked out till about 2005, I always think.
So about like 40 years?
Probably, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he knew a lot of people out there, too, a lot of the jockeys.
And he was like a ticket curator, ticket taker?
I think he did, yeah. I think he was a ticket taker. He worked in the clubhouse and surf club. He worked in up there.
Paid to capture her, many fell in rapture of her. I could be chasing a filly at the track, Joe. The odds won't be 100 to 1. In the real world or at the track, you live to get even, you get even worse. I could tell a morning glory from a runner in the afternoon didn't need a form. She was a persona of forms. But sometimes, Joe, you never know who's going to show up at the starting gate. The real deal or something off the bets list, just filling up the card. Was she a hunch play, Joe? 2 with a 7, 6 with a 9, or a tip from the jocks room? Information, Joe, is only reliable when you know the source from which it came from. Coupled as one, always being pieced together at the finish line. Eurydice knows Orpheus was a no-show. You don't look back at the wire. Like Orpheus, your dream may expire. For her, the lines that took her down that long, endless stretch of sodium white light as she circled the tracks of her life.
Speak much about your father and Jimmy's relationship to him growing up?
Well, that's my father and my mother divorced at a very young age, so I really didn't know my father that well outside of just seeing him occasionally. And my father, I don't know how I heard stories that he wasn't very nice to Jimmy. He was kind of mean to Jimmy, but I don't know. It's just hearsay, but who knows? So I don't really know the relationship they had. I know Jimmy would speak about him occasionally and always referred to him as the old man. I think he called him the old man. But he loved his mother, that was for sure. And of course, being out here, he was happy with his mom and everything, but when his mom passed away, that kind of made things even harder for him, and he was kind of like pretty much a recluse after that. So, I would call him, and sometimes I didn't hear from him for a few days, 3, 4, 5 days later,
Hey, I wanted to ask you, for how many years was Jimmy's mother in that assisted living facility?
His brother said like 26 years.
She was in there, the one in Alameda?
Yeah.
Wow.
Where Julia Vinograd was.
Right.
And he said he saw her almost every week or every day.
Wow.
Then he visited her at the cemetery.
How often at the cemetery would Jimmy visit his mom?
Daily or weekly.
Wow.
He was upset.
He still had his mother's voice message on. When I first was calling, he had his mom's voice on there because I guess she hadn't passed too long. I mean, I don't know how long his mother had been gone, but he always talk about his mom and stuff,
Just loved his mother and was devastated when she died. And he didn't go on for hours gushing about her, but when he did talk about her, it was, my mom was the greatest thing ever, And so when Jimmy talked about his mother, I felt for him because I knew he lost somebody that he really loved. I could tell.
How many years did he box?
Oh, shoot. He was probably boxing for, I want to say, about 5 or 6 years. I think he won. My brother, Jimmy, I used to have pictures of him. He won the Golden Gloves. I know that. I know he won the Golden Gloves.
Somebody did show me a couple pictures of him boxing. Somebody had them that knew him.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't even have those anymore. But, yeah, I don't. Yeah, he won the Golden Gloves and state champion, stuff like that. But I think that's when he went to New York. After that, I pretty much went to New York and was back there for quite a while.
Listen, lonely girl, I've told the sun to shine for you. Listen, lonely girl. I've told the sky that you like blue. I've told the breeze to kiss your hair the way I'd do if I were there. So you'll remember me and always wait for me.
Jimmy Lyons moved to New York after high school, which had to have been in the late 50s, early 60s. It's a mystery what he did in New York. We know that he acted in a film, and he was part of the Actors Studio, wrote plays, but few people know really what else he did or how long he stayed there. It's still pretty much a mystery to this day, but those years influenced his songwriting and his vocal style as a jazz singer.
Oh, okay. I have something really special to say about Jimmy Lyons because he is the very first person to make the kind of sounds that you are going to hear. A lot of people are doing this kind of thing just as a lot of people are doing poetry and dance together. Natika was a pioneer. But back in New York at the Gaslight Cafe, where in the early days of the beats and the poetry and jazz were coming together, later days of the beats, poetry and jazz are coming together. Now in the Gaslight Cafe, they could have poetry readings, and they didn't have to have a special cabaret license or entertainment license because poetry is conversation. It's words, right? Well, Jimmy began making different kinds of sounds out of words. He began to elongate sounds and to make up sounds. So the city had been trying to close down some of the poetry reading places because they didn't always like the content, but how can you arrest people for talking? You can't do that. Free speech. Well, they decided to make a special case, the police did, out of Jimmy Lyons and arrested him. And he had to go to jail, or his poetry had to go to court. And the judge said, okay, well, we'll listen to what you were doing. And so Jimmy stood up in court, and he did this kind of poetry that you're going to hear tonight. And the judge, you would never think that he would win this case, but the judge said he had a right to expand the boundaries of poetry. So he was really one case.
Wind, dark street, silent alley, night's heat. Once a heart in shadows light stood a still, soundless night and cried for love. The flight of a night-type kind of love. The flickering places, sad, happy, gray, I know my way, faces whirl on the magic ring. There and everywhere the post be to stop and stare. Someone must care, and on and on and on it swings. The flickering city-type thing.
A lot of the people that are my heroes are from a past era. Like I really love the bebop and the slightly younger than bebop era, the late 50s, like from the 40s to the early 60s jazz from New York City primarily, although it came up all over the country, but really that was the focus of my passion at the time. And Jimmy was there in New York at that time. He was in the Village. Like I'd mentioned names, he says, oh yeah, I'd hear him all the time at the 5 Spot. Oh yeah, I'd hear him at the Vanguard. I knew him. I knew, I'd talked to Mingus, and he knew these people, and so that became our bond. I think he made an era that I'd never get to live in, that I could only think about and listen to the records and romanticize about. He was my link to making that era more real for me.
Poets were hanging out at clubs and would start doing, this kind of rapping and
basically what rappers are doing nowadays. I mean, I would say that what rappers are doing now probably wouldn't exist unless Jimmy and those jazz poets, so to speak, did their thing back then, because it was all spur of the moment. You know, come up with an idea and just go with it.
All of the prostitutes at this party have already acknowledged Olga as their master, except for Elaine. And this, Olga knows, is only a matter of time. Jimmy had been trying hard to get his prey Elaine to hook herself. For this would probably mean that he would get something more to his needs. Jimmy had become a mainliner, and pot held no more kicks for him. Jimmy had worked his way down to becoming a worthless parasite, an animal that lives on another without making any useful or fitting return. Jimmy would assist Olga in her dirty work and be rewarded when some innocent person like Elaine would suffer. "Please, Jimmy, please help me," she cried. "No, Jimmy. No, don't. You don't know what you're doing. God help me."
You little bitch, where is the money? Tell me and we'll call the whole thing even. You know you're going to tell me, so let's not make it hard on both of us. This is your last chance. Where is the money?
Do you think he really hoped and yearned and hungered to be famous?
In some ways, yes, but there's, different people have different motives for being famous, and I think he really did want to communicate or convey his art forms, it is a form of storytelling, and I think it's, wanting to be acknowledged and appreciated. So, fame is just one vehicle for being acknowledged and appreciated.
And I think what happened is when he came out here, he kind of went downhill after that. I know so. His whole life kind of went downhill after that because he was trying to keep things going in Alameda, and doing his poetry. But he wasn't quite the same guy that he was. And he was more. I think he was more talented in New York than he was when he came back here. So he had a pretty colorful life back then. He knew a lot of people, and I think that was his happiest times.
What do you listen for in a poem? Do you hear the sound of the poet in flesh and bone? Do you hear time measure distance, following a rider of a pale horse down a white and endless sleep? Do you see the diluted morphine in the moment before the needle draws the suffering blood. The fix is on, pretty Mary. The fix is on.
I would say I knew Jimmy pretty well. You know, maybe there's people that knew him even deeper, but he was of a generation he's only going to disclose so much. You know, that was a generation that was much quieter about their life, and it's kind of like, let's stay focused on the music. Let's supplement all of our sexuality, all of our family of origin issues, all of our pain, all of our joy, and everything in the lyric. And Jimmy did that with the lyric. He had a way of not twisting a lyric, but speaking a lyric in a beautiful way. He did it in spoken poetry. But I think to be able to be a poet and a beatnik and a songwriter and a singer and all of that rolled into one package of Jimmy Lyons was absolutely amazing.
You know, with what Jimmy was into in that form of music, really 5% of the world's population is sophisticated enough to dig it, you know. But like I said, you know, with Jimmy, his thing, you know, what he explained to me, he said, yeah, you know, Larry, it's not, you know, the kind of song you play on a radio, but it is the kind of thing that you know, a writer would use, somebody who's writing a play or doing a movie and stuff. You know, they could use part of that for a scene or something like that. You know, that kind of thing.
Jimmy had passion. Jimmy came up there on the stage and just blew everything apart and gave us, you know, like when he started just like shouting that time, there was passion in everything he did. I mean, from the first word till the last.
There used to be this jazz club in Alameda called Kelly's. It was on Park Street, founded by Kelly Park in 2003. They had open mic nights. They featured many notable jazz musicians in the Bay Area and beyond. It was also a bar. A really interesting space for Alameda, unique for the Bay Area even. But in 2007, the club closed. They just weren't making enough money to survive. It just lives on through the memories and the stories of the people who were there. It was the kind of venue where jazz was at the forefront and the focus of the venue.
I'd like to say about Kelly's was that Kelly's was a little situation, the open mic nights, where people could come, where people who were just on the fringes of music but had something that they wanted to do could interact with real, like Sidney Bechet used to say, real musicians.
So I saw him there a lot, and then, like I said, I inferred from somebody, either him or somebody else knowing that he had invested some money in Kelly's to help make it the jazz club that he envisioned, and it really became that. I think it was only around for 4, 5, 6 years before Kelly decided he didn't want to run a bar. He's a piano player and a drummer. But while it was there, it was really cool.
Kelly's was a great place for Jimmy because it was the only place for Jimmy because there was nothing else going on. He would come into Kelly's club and sit there and not talk to anyone. And he was there with his paper in front of him, always writing and waiting for his turn to come up on stage. And once he performed, which was like really exciting, then he'd walk off stage, go right back to writing, and the next thing you know, he's gone.
Do you think playing at Kelly's changed Jimmy's life, and maybe that were like his happiest years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was, I don't want to say devastated when Kelly's closed, but he was really, you know, it created a big hole. It created a big hole for a lot of people, you know.
Dues paid, Joe, when your laughter couldn't mask or hide the sorrow. Denial would never bring you and her time to borrow what yesterday had seemed lost. Now turning cold with winter's frost, it's all too clear. The only thing that will hold you here, when you feel naked before a lonely fear, is the touch of her hand and your horn that holds the love in place. Before its shadows vanish from your face, before footsteps lose their trace, you hope you will fly, a butterfly in her eyes, and somewhere arc across the sky. This is your final choice.
I don't know what else to say. How do you sum up a life? I mean, how do you get outside of your own head or your own ego and come to terms with your own mortality? I think, Jimmy, the way he lived his life, he lived jazz, I think that's the lesson.
I think aging was hard for Jimmy. I think he always thought of himself as 50, and tried to mask it. And he was getting brittle and much older, and I almost wanted to reach out to him and say, you don't have to try so hard,
It was 2016, so it wasn't super recent, but even by 2016 he had cognitive issues and getting out. I mean, you could still read everything, and I told you before, you bring over a stack of just like loose leaf sheets and handwritten stuff, and he'd set it on the ground, and he would sit in that chair over here, and he'd pull something out and go to read it, and then towards the end he had trouble getting through it all. But
did you know that he had colon cancer and prostate cancer?
I think I remember him having cancer, but I don't remember if I heard that directly from him, although he might have talked about going in for some operations at some point. But I'm not recalling him dwelling on it, certainly. If he mentioned it as a peripheral, it's quite possible, but I just know that his focus, he would always bring the focus back to being creative.
I have forgotten you, my love. Yet you exist in another room, softly sleeping. I have forgotten you, my love. Yet there's the night in my eyes, in my thinking. I have forgotten the gentle wonder of your touch. I've forgotten too all the magic of you. I've forgotten so much. I have forgotten you, my love. Yet you exist beyond the mist in my dreaming. I have forgotten you, my love. Yet you exist. Yet you exist in love.
Jimmy Lyons and romantic relationships. That's another mystery. I know he had romantic feelings for Sarah Lowndes, also known as Sarah Dillon, who was married to Bob Dylan, but I think those feelings were unrequited. From my conversations with Jimmy, I think he romantically was involved with some of the actresses in the movie that he co-starred in with called The White Slaves of Chinatown. Other than that, I don't know of any other women in his life.
Really, I had a girlfriend for a long time. He knew her, and we were on and off, and so he always asked me about that. He was always pretty receptive to that.
Did he talk about other women besides Sally and Sarah?
Not that much. I don't even know if he was even ever married. I don't know. We didn't talk super deep, Stefan. We spent a lot of time together. It was almost always just talking music and recording and local scene.
Mm-hmm.
When Kelly's was around. I never really asked him about his love life or anything. It would be a fascinating story. He did talk about, he had a fond appreciation for the female of the species.
I think writing for him helped him keep his sanity and helped him stay alive. And, I think he just accepted being alone in his old age. He did have friends and acquaintances, but, I think he seemed to feel comfortable in his writer artist mode. What do you think he cared about the most?
I don't know what he most cared about, but Jimmy had a special place in his heart for musicians. He understood the psyche and the complexities of musicians and stuff, and what we deal through, especially those of us who make our living doing it. He could empathize with that. He could really empathize with that, and he's just very much a part of that community. He loved that community.
What do you think you'll miss most about Jimmy?
Oh my gosh, I miss his creative, generous, loving spirit. He was so generous. I can't tell you how many times he helped us, and I know he helped people he didn't even know if they needed it. I mean, he wasn't always the best, maybe, judge of character, and I know some people took advantage of him. I love the fact that he was such an artist, and that for him, he saw everything poetically. He saw everything in terms of what he could create out of it. Past experiences, life. He was just constantly in that creative mode.
He was passionate about life and about art.
Life and art?
Yeah, life and art. It was definitely a pure artist, a genuine artist.
A genuine artist?
Yes, that's what it was. And he was a nice, friendly, warm guy. Every single time that I used to talk and come across, we used to talk. And it was a joy to talk. It was great.
I can't say enough about the person. He was a great inspiration to me at his age, that he just kept plugging away and doing what he loved most, and that was the most important thing. But he showed me different things that I valued, and that was like when you approach something like, this is it. This is your last moment on the planet. So play like it's your last moment on the planet.
Can't go back now to those yesterdays. Can't go back now. The old days have gone away, all used up. In that used up way, you can't go back now. For the morning wind has a winter sound. Better pack my things, time to leave this town. About fixing the motor on my camper truck. I'll be somewhere by morning with a little luck. What love I had didn't do no good, but no one ever said it would. And I'm ever there, but no one asked, no one cared. Can't go back now. Streets are paved, the highway's gone, the landscape's changed, and the old familiar places are never the same. The rents increase, they lose their lease. Big city monopolies have paved the streets. a separate feast for the dance. Little man's and Santa's chance, giving ends like the drizzling rain, comes and goes on the window pane. I'll leave the same friends I had when I came. Cold and lonely is the name of the game. I'll follow thunder, chill the night. The Delta Mist has a special light. I'll be somewhere by morning, but I don't know where. Somewhere by morning, and I really don't care. Can't go back now. Can't go back now.
Papa, do you?